folk singer is dead after she was attacked by a pair of coyotes.
What is the monkey doing? Tell me what the monkey...
He ripped her face off!
We actually have a trainer in the water with one of our whales.
If I show weakness, if I retreat, I may be hurt, I may be killed.
Baby Azaria Chamberlain was taken by a dingo back in 1980.
Welcome, one and Paul. Logan Paul, that is. My guest today, famous Japanese forest walker, Logan Paul. How are you, buddy? I'm just kidding. That's not my co-host today. My co-host today is Indian Drum Circle. Put your hands together. Oh, I've got an actual... There we go. Very good. As you learned last week, African Drum Circle on a little bit of a break from the show after one too many controversies. His stand-in is Indian Drum Circle. I apologize, Indian Drum Circle. Buddy, how was your week? Yeah? Had some great feedback about you on episode 148. People seem to love you, so well done, buddy. A marked difference from the experience I usually get from the commenters based on the African Drum Circle. But, I love our bands. I love what you do. I love what you bring to the show. Keep it up, and you might be a permanent fixture on this here podcast. And what is this here podcast? Well, this is Man Eaters, the only true crime podcast on the entire disgusting internet where all the killers are real animals. Whether it's bitings, scratchings, maulings, or clawings, or Logan Paulings, we are here to talk about it. And today, we are taking a little trip in our time machine back to a little island nation called England. In it, that's where we're going. Fish and chips on the barbie. Oh, the barbie's more of an Australian thing, isn't it? Yeah. We're going back to England, and we're doing a bit of a historical deep dive on a very interesting individual who met his end at the claws and the teeth of a very nasty, large cat. Before we get into today's episode, I want to say thank you to everyone who listened to the previous episode, commenting on all the TikToks I've been doing, and also the YouTube video, which I put up. Thank you to the literal dozens of people who watched that episode on YouTube, youtube.com/maneaters. We've also got a TikTok where I'm doing a little bit more, a little bit of journalism. I really shouldn't call it journalism. It is just regurgitating facts on stories that actual journalists have put together. But, some interesting discussions. We were in our Scratch of the Day segment, spoiler alert, we are going to cover an update to a story, which I did do an update on the TikTok about, and sparked a little bit of debate on the TikTok as well as on the YouTube shorts. So, make sure you're following my accounts everywhere you can. Instagram, of course, TikTok, YouTube, Grindr, Hinge, Minge, Christian Mingle, Single Mingle, My Peenie Tingle. That's a new app I'm working on for sufferers of syphilis. So let's get into our story today, gang. We are talking today about the death of Harold Davidson. Let's do it. So, Harold Francis Davidson, better known as the rector of Stiffkey, was a Church of England priest whose life went spectacularly off the rails. In 1932, following a very public scandal, he was convicted of immorality by the church court and defrocked. Now, Davidson always insisted that he was innocent, and in true showman fashion, he tries to raise funds to fight for his reinstatement by squeezing himself into a barrel on Blackpool's seafront. He appeared in other bizarre sideshows too, until his final fateful act. In Skegness, which is a weird name, it sounds very Scandinavian, but it's in England. Skegness, he was mauled to death by a lion during a seaside circus performance. Now, before all the chaos, Davidson had a modest career on the London stage. He was ordained in 1903, and he threw himself into charitable work among London's most poor, a passion that he carried into his appointment as rector of Stiffkey in 1906. After serving as a naval chaplain in World War I, he focused mainly on rescuing London's young women from a life he considered vice, earning his nickname, the prostitute's padre. He approached hundreds of girls, often putting himself in awkward, compromising situations. While there was little evidence of actual wrongdoing, his unusual behavior and scandalous photographs of him with a near-naked teenage girl made him a lightning rod for controversy. His parishioners, fed up with his neglect of local duties, eventually brought him before the Bishop of Norwich on a consistory court. Davidson's attempt at a comeback were equal parts desperate and theatrical. Despite widespread recognition, even in church circles, that he had been unfairly treated, his sideshow stunts brought fame, notoriety, and almost no money. His death at the claws and teeth of a lion only cemented his legend. Over the decades, his story has been retold in books, plays, films, and the occasional kind of true crime adjacent podcast, with his descendants and historians largely agreeing. He may have been eccentric and naive and quite deeply misguided, but his intentions were often genuine, and he didn't deserve the humiliation that he endured throughout his life. So let's go all the way back to Mr. Harold Davidson's birth. He was born on the 14th of July, 1875, in Sholing, a scrappy port town near Southampton, to the Reverend Francis Davidson and his wife, Alice. Now, religion ran thick in the family, so much so that at one point, 27 Davidsons were either clergy or had been clergy at some point. His dad, Francis, had been the vicar of St. Mary's in Sholing since 1866. He was described as, quote, a tiny man with a luxuriant beard that made him look like a gnome. But don't be fooled. He could hold his own when needed, and he genuinely cared for his flock, even those of whom were dog workers and drifters who really couldn't have given a rat's ass about the church. From an early age, Haroldson's path seemed set: follow Papa into the church. So he went to Bannister Court School at the age of 6, a place mainly for the sons of merchant navy officers, and in 1890 he was shipped off to live with 2 maiden aunts in Croydon while attending Whitgift School. Here, Harold discovered the stage. He became quite a keen amateur actor, inspired by his schoolmate Leon Quatermain, who would later find fame on stage and screen. The pair performed together in a school farce and called Sent to the Tower in 1894. Excuse me, the two paired... Oh my god, I'm going to take that again. The pair performed together in a school farce called Sent to the Tower in 1894. Editor, edit that out, that mistake, that was awful. Davidson also developed a soft spot for charitable work. Under his auntie's watchful eyes, he spent time at Toynbee Hall, an East End charity for the poor. Between his acting, volunteering, and general adolescent wandering, his studies, however, began to slip. He failed to win a scholarship that would have sent him to Oxford and on to his holy orders. And facing his father's disapproval, Harold made a bold and quite shocking choice for Davidson. He decided to try the stage instead, and see if he could make people laugh before he tried to save their souls. Long before he became the infamous prostitute's padre, Harold Davidson was a man of the stage, much like me, drawing... Not really. I don't want to compare myself. I'm hopefully not going to be killed by a lion as my final act. He was a drawing room entertainer, to be precise. This was the sort of performance meant to amuse the rising middle class, quote, neither cultured nor resourceful, but desperate to be diverted, as biographer Tom Cullen put it. Within months of leaving Whitgift in 1894, Davidson was performing comic routines in London at Steinway Hall on Lower Seymour Street. He did well enough to land a provincial gig with the Masonic lodges, sometimes in literary societies and at any social club that needed a good old laugh. His crowning triumph Well, that was playing Lord Frankfort Baberly in a touring production of Charlie's Aunt, a frenzied role that required impersonating a rich Oxford aunt, perfectly suited to Davidson's energy and flair for chaos. Even amid the laughter and applause, Davidson maintained a curious moral rigor. He was a teetotal, and he upheld the high standards of personal behavior. He read the Bible to the elderly wherever he toured. One story he told later seems almost prophetic. In November of 1894, walking along a foggy Thames embankment, he stopped a 16-year-old girl from throwing herself into the river. She had run away from Cambridge, and she was penniless and alone. Davidson paid for her fare home, saying the encounter left, quote, a tremendous impression on him. A moment that would shape his lifelong obsession with rescuing young women. By 1898, Davidson finally bowed to his father's wishes and began studying for holy orders, thanks to the intervention of Reverend Basil Wilberforce, the grandson of William Wilberforce. A side note, we are going to have a lot of white people names in this episode. Basil Wilberforce sounds like the fake name you would give to like a British Ponce character if you were playing him. What's your name, sir? Oh, Basil Wilberforce. Yeah, it's very good. Wilberforce pulled some strings to get Davidson into Exeter College in Oxford, despite his patchy qualifications, a true Nepo baby if there ever was one. And true to form, Davidson's time at Oxford was chaotic. He had boundless energy, zero respect for the rules, a chronic lateness problem, and a persistent inability to pass his exams. He kept performing on stage when he could, decorating his rooms with autographed actress photos, and once bragged that he had a £1,000 a year stage salary for a paltry £3 a week as a curate. By 1901, his academic failures forced him out of the college, though he continued at Grindle's Hall, a cramming establishment. Finally, in 1903, at the age of 28, Davidson scraped together enough money... Finally, at the age of 28, Davidson scraped through his exams and was reordained by the Bishop of Oxford, reluctantly, because even then, nobody thought his theatrical, eccentric, rule-breaking man had the makings of a priest. In 1901, Oxford got a dose of theatrical glamour when Annie Horniman's travelling company rolled into town. Davidson, never one to resist a bit of drama off stage, fell head over heels for one of the leading ladies, a Miss Moira Molly Cassandra Soren, a striking blonde from County Meath in Ireland, with piercing blue eyes. They got engaged quickly, but I don't want you to start thinking this is going to be a fairy tale romance. Their relationship was tempestuous, broken off more than once, and marriage wasn't even really on the table until Davidson had properly launched his new life in the church. Now, his first holy appointment? Curate at the Holy Trinity Church in Windsor, Berkshire, with a bonus gig as an assistant chaplain to the Household Cavalry at Combermere Barracks. That is a quite prestigious start. In 1905, he was off to London as curate at St. Martin in the Fields. There, his boundless energy and tireless enthusiasm earned him praise, even if his theatrical tendencies hinted that a quiet, conventional church life might not entirely be his style. By 1906, Harold Davidson landed the plum job of rector of the Norfolk parish of Stiffkey with Mawson, thanks in large part to the 6th Marquis Townsend. The Townsends had been major players in Norfolk politics for generations, and Davidson's appointment was probably a thank you for smoothing over a family scandal. The scandal was this. As curate of St. Martin in the Fields, he had officiated at the Marquis's wedding to a Gwladys, it's Gwladys, how do you say that? Gwladys Sutherthest, a Yorkshire heiress whose family's fortune was more theoretical than real. Now, the stiff key living was a prize. It came with 60 acres of glebe land, a handsome Georgian rectory, and a salary that started at £503 a year, rising to £800 under Davidson. For a man of ambition and flair, this was the perfect base. Stiffkey itself was a small, windswept village on the northern Norfolk coast, straddling the River Stiffkey and backed by wide salt marshes. When Davidson arrived, there were about 350 residents, mostly poor, but with a smattering of shops and pubs. The locals quickly warmed to him, affectionately calling him Little Jimmy, all of 5'3" of him. This gentry, however, was another story. Colonel Groom, the main landowner of the area, famously clashed with Davidson after the priest had the audacity to rebuke him for keeping a mistress. On October 9th, 1906, Davidson married his on-again, off-again love, Molly Saurin, and the Stiffkey Rectory became a bustling family home, with children arriving at steady intervals. But while he now had a parish and domestic duties, Davidson's heart, and perhaps his curiosity, well, they remained in London. He had spent so much of the week there throwing himself into social work and theatrical connections. He spent much of his week there throwing himself into social work and theatrical connections. Through an old Oxford friend, Reginald Kennedy Cox, another very white person name, he became involved with the Malvernian Mission, the Malvernian Mission, a forerunner of the Dockland settlements, later serving as a trustee. He also became chaplain to the Actors' Church Union at St. Paul's in Covent Garden, which I've actually been to. It's a lovely church. And he could often be found backstage, ministering to the city's showgirls, sometimes with a zeal that made even them a little bit uncomfortable. By 1910, his reach had gone international. Davidson regularly visited Paris, occasionally acting as a chaperone for dancers at the Folie Barouge, and he also invited struggling or aspiring actresses to stay at the Stiffkey Rectory, sometimes 20 at a time, much to the horror of his wife and the local establishment, who fretted over the morals of farmhands roaming around the rectory. Among his most vocal critics was Major Philip Hammond, a Morstan churchwarden who would go on to be Davidson's principal nemesis. And I've always said this, you've really made it in life when you have a nemesis. I love that for him. By the time the First World War broke out in 1914, Harold Davidson was 39 years old enough to know better, and young enough to volunteer anyway. In October of 1915, perhaps seeking a break from the increasingly chaotic Stiffkey Rectory, he joined the Royal Navy as a chaplain. His first posting was on HMS Gibraltar, a depot ship tucked away in the Shetland Islands. It was here that Davidson's unique blend of zeal and eccentricity began to make waves. I don't know why I wrote the word if I always struggle with it. Eccentricity. He earned the iration of his shipmates by calling church parades every time another vessel visited the anchorage, and yet somehow he had the full backing of the base commander, Vice Admiral Sir Reginald Tupper, also known as Holy Reggie. Now, not everyone was impressed. His service record from Gibraltar's captain's notes note that Davidson performs his duties in a perfunctory manner, not on good terms with messmates, disregards mess rules and regulations. In other words, he was loved by some and exasperated others, and he was never boring. On October 1916, Davidson was posted to HMS Fox in the Middle East, where things got a little bit complicated, as they tend to do over in the Middle East. Shortly after arriving, he was arrested by naval police during a raid on a Cairo brothel. His explanation, well, very good explanation. He was on the hunt for a diseased prostitute who had been infecting his men. A mission apparently guided by equal parts moral duty and misguided bravado. His commanding officer's report was predictably negative. Still, Davidson stayed with the Fox until 1918 in August, when he moved to HMS Leviathan in the Northern Atlantic. Here, The tone somewhat softened. One commander grudgingly praised him as, quote, a clever writer and entertainer who pays attention to his duty. By March of 1919, Davidson had left the Navy, having survived the seas, the scandals, and the odd eyebrow-raising mission or two, and he was ready to return to civilian and theatrical life. Whilst Davidson returned from the war, he found that Molly was 6 months pregnant. Now, the timing of this made things painfully clear. He was not the father. The child, daughter, was born on the 21st of June 1919 and was likely fathered by a Canadian Army colonel named Ernst Dudemaine, an old school friend who had stayed at the rectory the previous year. Now, despite the betrayal, Davidson, ever the eccentric moralist, accepted the child as his own, noting with some comfort that she bore a passing resemblance to him. Seeking escape from the tense atmosphere at Stiffkey, Davidson applied for a posting at the chaplain in Simla in India, but that fell through. Instead, he returned to his pre-war pattern, spending his weekdays in London, leaving early Monday and returning late Saturday. Sometimes missed trains or other mishaps meant that he barely made it back for his Sunday service, and occasionally he didn't show up at all. By now, Davidson's personal crusade was in full swing. Perhaps haunted by the memory of saving that suicidal girl from the Thames a quarter century earlier, he had decided that nearly every young woman alone in London was in need of rescue. Take Rose Ellis, for example, who he met in Leicester Square in September of 1920. She was 20, she was penniless, and she was eking out a living through part-time prostitution. We've all been there. Davidson put her up in a room, met her weekly, brought her to the Stiffkey rectory to work in the gardens, tried to get her a theatre job, whisked her off to Paris to find work as an au pair, covered her medical bills if she fell ill, and supplied her with a small sum of money over a decade-long friendship. Davidson estimated that he approached between 150 to 200 girls a year, later revising that total to somewhere between 500 and 1,000 over a dozen years. His hunting grounds were London's countless tea shops, Lyons, ABC, Express Daily. Biographer Blythe noted that Davidson was entranced by the ineffable harmonies created by starched linen cracking over young breasts and black stocking calves in chubby concourse just below the hem of the parlourmaid's frock. What a fucked up sentence that was, Jesus. Many women rebuffed him. Some tea shops actually banned him, and landladies hated his habit of visiting tenants at all hours. Now, modern commentators have found little evidence that David ever behaved indecently. He bought tea, he found rooms, he listened, and he helped find work, sometimes on stage and sometimes in domestic service. And he actually loved his unofficial title, the prostitute's padre, which he told his bishop was, quote, the proudest title that a true priest of Christ could ever hold. Keeping up his London lifestyle, however, wasn't cheap, and the Stiffkey rectory just couldn't cover it. Around 1920, Davidson stumbled into what might be politely called a financial misadventure when he met Arthur John Gordon, a supposedly wealthy American company promoter. In reality, Gordon was an undischarged bankrupt who had was a full-blown conman. Undeterred, Davidson threw himself into Gordon's schemes, investing his own savings and, against all better judgment, persuading others to do the same. He borrowed heavily to boost his investments, and by 1925, the debts had piled up into serious trouble. In February that same year, he failed to pay his local rates and was threatened with prison. Davidson dodged jail by turning to the moneylenders, who were happy to lend at exorbitant interest rates. By October, the only way out was bankruptcy, a petition listing debts of £2,924. Eventually, a deal was struck. Half of his Stiffkey stipend went straight towards paying off its creditors. And somehow, through all of this, he managed to keep up his London routine through it all. He never lost faith in Gordon's, quote, essential honesty, convinced that someday the investments would pay off. In fact, much of Davidson's London time was not spent rescuing young women or mingling with showgirls. It was spent chasing Gordon, tracking down the elusive American friend like a man chasing a mirage. Most of Davidson's parishioners struggled and accepted that his London rescue missions were in fact honourable, if not a little bit eccentric. But not everybody was convinced. Chief among his skeptics was Major Philip Harmond, his nemesis. Harmond hated the constant stream of visitors David brought to Stiffkey Rectory and was convinced the rector was neglecting his parish duties. Their feud escalated in 1927, and over something that on paper sounds almost trivial. Davidson wrote Hammond a letter, what biographer Jonathan Tucker calls, quote, breathless in its rudeness and insensitivity, berating him for clearing a patch of ground in the Morstan churchyard near his late wife's grave. Davidson's argument? Well, he said, Morstan churchyard is the private freehold property of the rector of Morstan. You have no possible right to interfere with it any way without permission, any more than I have the right to come and annex part of your garden. Other clashes soon followed. Once Davidson showed up late to a Morstan communion service, having forgotten the bread and the wine. Furious, Hammond sent him back to the rectory to fetch it. The final straw, in Hammond's eyes, came in 1930 when Davidson failed to return in time for the Armistice Day ceremony at the local war memorial. By early 1931, Hammond had had quite enough. Advised by a priest cousin, he lodged a formal complaint with the Bishop of Norwich, citing Davidson's supposed misbehaviour with women in London. Under the Clergy Discipline Act of 1892, priests could be prosecuted in a consistory court for immoral acts and, if convicted, face punishments up to a full defrocking. Bishop Bertram Pollock hesitated. David was a high-profile priest, after all. But his legal counsel, Henry Dashwood, insisted that the case go ahead. Dashwood hired a private inquiry agent who tracked down Rose Ellis, Davidson's longtime London friend. Ellis was persuaded to sign a statement describing her decade-long association with him. It was really sensational-sounding stuff, though it was almost entirely innocent. The most scandalous detail was that she had once lanced a boil on Davidson's bottom. She quickly retracted the statement, and it never appeared in the court. The investigation dragged on for months. The bishop initially toyed with replacing the charges with something milder, something like indiscipline rather than immorality. But by February 1932, it was too late to quiet the story. The Evening News had already printed lurid allegations, and other papers had jumped on the scandal. Then, on the 7th of February, a 17-year-old named Barbara Harris sent a letter to Pollock, making specific accusations. Quote, he has the keys of a lot of girls' flats and front doors. I know a lot of things against him that might help you. Matthew Paris later called it a masterpiece in vituperation. Davidson's lawyers failed to spot a glaring difference between Harris's handwriting and the letter, a misstep that would make her testimony in court far more damaging than it deserved to be. On the 29th of March 1932, a consistory court convened to hear the case against Harold Davidson, presided over by F. Keppel North, the Norwich diocesan chancellor. Davidson faced some seriously damning charges, associating with women of loose character and accosting, molesting, and importuning young females for immoral purposes. The prosecution pulled out all the stops, led by Roland of Oliver KC, and including the future cabinet minister Walton Monckton, a legal dream team. Davidson, meanwhile, hired seasoned lawyers of his own, funding parts of the defense through the sale of newspaper stories. So much public interest and so many London witnesses meant that the trial wasn't held in sleepy Norwich. It was staged in Church House in Westminster, smack dab in the middle of the capital. The prosecution opened with a summary of Davidson's London escapades, and then they called Barbara Harris to the stand. Her testimony, Cullen writes, was, quote, a whip of scorpions across Davidson's face. He had met Harris in September of 1930, when she was 16. Using his favourite trick, pretending she was a famous film actress, he persuaded her to share a meal. Soon, he was visiting her lodgings, giving her small amounts of money, promising work, and sometimes sharing her room. Harris testified that he never had intercourse with her, though he had tried on multiple occasions, and that when she refused, he had quote-unquote relieved himself. Gross. That's a really gross thing. The court also heard about some of the stranger aspects of their association. Harris being made to work as an unpaid kitchen maid at the Stiff Key Rectory, sleeping on nothing but a chair. Davidson's repeated promises to divorce his wife and marry her. And an incident in which Harris and another girl, the latter in a nightgown, danced in front of Davidson so he could judge their abilities. If true, Tucker writes, the picture painted by Harris was, quote, a man who was out of control, running around London, entertaining teenage girls, adopting the guise of a kindly priest to ingratiate himself. Harris was followed by a parade of landladies, waitresses, and other young women, all confirming Davidson's habitual pestering, but none of them actually accused him of outright impropriety. When Davidson finally took to the stand on the 25th of May, his flippant, light-hearted manner turned his testimony into what Tucker calls a comedy routine, with the rector's counsel as straight man. His disastrous finances were aired, and he bristled at suggestions that he and Gordon had been, quote, partners in crime. And then came the moment that would ultimately break him, the photograph. Taken on the 28th of March, 1932, it showed Davidson with a nearly naked 15-year-old girl named Estelle Douglas, daughter of one of his oldest friends. Davidson insisted it was a publicity shot to help her find acting work, that he had been duped, and that he had thought that she was wearing a bathing suit. But the damage was done. By the 6th of June, after the final speeches, the court adjourned until the 8th of July, leaving the Chancellor alone to decide the fate of the little rector who had somehow turned his life into a public spectacle. Even as the court dragged on, Davidson kept turning up at Stiffkey and Morstan to officiate, though his erratic attendance meant substitutes were often needed on hand. On the 12th of June 1932, things reached full farce. The Reverend Richard Cattell had just begun the evening service at Stiffkey when Davidson stormed in and tried to grab the Bible. The two men wrestled over the book for several tense seconds before Cattell surrendered, announcing to the congregation, "As nothing short of force will prevent Mr. Davidson from taking part, I can see nothing left to do but to withdraw." Reporters and gawking crowds were now a regular feature at weekend services, prompting the Archdeacon of Lynn to deplore the, quote, media circus and plead for the full spirit of worship to return to Sunday services. The verdict came on the 8th of July 1932, and Davidson was found guilty on 5 counts of immorality. The bishop would decide the sentence, but Davidson still had the right to seek and leave to appeal for the Privy Council. With funds running low and legal costs mounting, he reverted to his old life on the stage. On the 18th of July, he debuted a variety act at the Prince's Cinema in Wimbledon, later touring the provinces, though theatres quickly cooled to booking him, possibly due to the pressure of local church authorities. Undeterred, Davidson found a new, more public venue, the Blackpool Seafront, also known as the Golden Mile. There, he climbed into a barrel and invited thousands to peer through a tiny window and watch him. It was part sideshow, part desperation, and not everyone was impressed. One visitor years later recalled, "He was very tatty and the place stank." His neighbours in the spectacle? Well, of course, the bearded lady from Russia was one, as was Mariana the Gorilla Girl and Dick Harrow, the world's most fattest man. Hammond and the other parishioners were absolutely horrified. The bishop delayed forbidding Davidson to preach. So when Hammond locked Morrison Church against him, the rector simply moved outdoors, delivering a sermon to a large congregation on the grass. By August, Davidson's license to minister was officially revoked. His final service at Stiffkey on the 21st of August 1932 drew around 1,000 people outside the church. That afternoon, he demanded the Morstan Church keys from Hammond, who sent him packing with a substantial kick for which he was later fined. Davidson's hopes of appealing to the Privy Council were dashed twice, in July and again in October, on grounds of law and fact. On the 21st of October, a consistory court convened in Norwich Cathedral for sentencing. Davidson was allowed a brief address. He admitted to indiscretions, but he defended his actions and insisted on his innocence, quote, of any of the graver charges that have been made against me. And then came the climax of his fall. Bishop Pollock delivered a, quote, horrible little ceremony, as Blythe puts it, pronouncing the most severe sentence available. Deposition. Now, therefore, we, Bertram, do thereby pronounce, decree, and declare that the said Reverend Harold Francis Davidson, being a priest and deacon, ought to be entirely removed, deposed, and degraded from the said offices. Davidson was, in short, defrocked. As the gavel fell, Davidson erupted. He denounced the sentence, vowed to appeal to the Archbishop of Canterbury, Cosmo Gordon Lang, and walked out a deposed man, still defiant, still theatrical, and still refusing to play by anyone else's rules. Defrocked, broke, and saddled with the Constitutory Court's legal costs, Harold Davidson had only one option: return to Blackpool and embrace the life of a sideshow attraction. For the next 4 years, the barrel became his stage, interrupted only by occasional run-ins with the law and a 9-day stint in prison in 1933 for unpaid rent to a former London landlady. Ever the showman, he told the press, "While I'm in the barrel, I shall be occupied in preparing my case." The Barrel Act remained his signature, but Davidson also loved another gimmick. Over the years, he added frills worthy of a circus, freezing himself in a refrigerated chamber, roasting in glass-fronted ovens while a mechanized devil jabbed him with a pitchfork. In August of 1935, the freezing stunt got him arrested and charged with attempted suicide, but he won the case and walked away with £382 of damages for false imprisonment. How much he actually made from these exploits is unclear. Tucker suspects the main beneficiary was his agent, Luke Gannon, rather than Davidson himself. Meanwhile, Molly had managed to scrape together a small house in South Harrow, where Davidson spent his winters. Off-season, he patched together odd jobs: door-to-door book salesman, porter at St. Pancras Station, anything to survive. But even in these humble roles, he could not escape the press. In November of 1936, he was arrested and fined for pestering two 16-year-old girls at Victoria Station, having tried to recruit them for a West End audition. Later that month, Davidson crashed at a church assembly in Central Hall, Westminster, right under the Archbishop of Canterbury's nose. Though prevented from speaking, he made his presence felt, scattering dozens of mimeographed pamphlets titled "I Accuse," in which he extricated the church hierarchy and catalogued his grievances. By now, Davidson's life had become a bizarre spectacle, part legal crusade, part tragicomic circus, and all performed under the relentless gaze of fascinated and the scandalized public. By 1937, the crowds at Davidson's Blackpool sideshows were starting to thin, and the little Norfolk priest was desperate for a new stage. That summer, he accepted an invitation from the self-styled Captain Fred Rye to join his animal-themed show at the seaside resort of Skegness. Davidson described it as a welcome step up from what he called the blatant vulgarities of Blackpool. His act was a simple one, but it was also deadly. A 10-minute sermon outside a cage containing two lions, named Freddy and Toto, followed by a brief, terrifying encounter inside the cage. Courage was in short supply for Davidson, who had always been fearful of animals, but he persisted, supervised by a 16-year-old tamer named Irene Somner. The act was billed Daniel in a Modern Lion's Den, drawing crowds that included clergy curious to witness his spectacle. On the evening of the 28th of July, 1937, Davidson gave his usual oration and then stepped into the cage. For a few tense moments, the lions sat quietly. Then, in what Blythe describes as scarcely credible, the spectacle turned into horror. Eyewitnesses later recounted a scene ripped from the annals of classic martyrdom. Davidson cracked his whip and shouted, and Freddy, whether spooked or enraged, lunged. The lion knocked Davidson to the ground, clamped its powerful jaws around the rector's neck, and dragged him in a violent arc around the cage. Somna fought to intervene, screaming and prodding with her tools, until Freddy finally released the battered, bleeding, and unconscious Davidson. He was bloodied, shredded, and broken. One of the bones in his neck had snapped under the brute force of the attack. Some unverified reports claim that while waiting for the ambulance, Davidson maintained his composure enough to request the London newspapers be notified in time for the morning editions. Others suggest that he sat up in hospital, eager to hear impressions of the ordeal from visiting onlookers. Most historians, however, agree that Davidson never truly regained his consciousness. He died on July 30th, possibly hastened by an insulin injection from a doctor convinced that he was diabetic. The coroner ruled it death by misadventure. Friends and admirers covered the funeral costs, and on the 3rd of August, Davidson was laid to rest in the Stiffkey churchyard. Around 3,000 mourners attended, craning for a glimpse of the final curtain on a life equal parts tragedy, farce, and headline spectacle. Some climbed walls, rooftops, or trees to witness the burial. The headstone bore a line from Robert Louis Stevenson: "For on faith in man and genuine love of man, all searching after truth must be founded." Even in death, the little rector who had been court-martialed in a scandal, he lived in a circus, and he lived danger to the very end, he retained a measure of his signature impossible grandeur. In Skegness, Fred Rye saw Davidson's death not as a tragedy, but a marketing opportunity. Crowds flocked to see, quote, "the actual lion that mauled and caused the death of the ex-rector of Stiffkey." Meanwhile, Molly Davidson was left in dire financial straits. Her family appealed to the church authorities for help, and Archbishop Lang intervened discreetly, securing grants from 2 church charities that allowed her to survive. She lived out her final years in a Dulwich nursing home, passing away in 1955. Other major figures in the case faded away from public view. Bishop Pollock remained in Norwich until his resignation in 1942, a year before his death. Davidson's protégés, Rose Ellis, Barbara Harris, Estelle Douglas, and the others, disappeared from sight after 1932's trial. A 1934 letter from Davidson suggests that Harris was working at Selfridges under the name Babs Simpson. Later research reveals that she had married the war artist Leslie Cole and successfully concealed her identity from all inquiries and possibly even from her husband. After Davidson's death and burial, press interest began to fade. Newspapers turned to the looming crisis of the late 1930s, and for decades the story only resurfaced intermittently. In 1963, Blythe, called by Matthew Paris, quote, "The Affair," the best historian, published his account. The late 1960s saw 2 stage musicals, The Stiffkey Scandals of 1932 in Edinburgh and in London, and God Made Little Red Apples in Manchester. Both were flops, and when the first was adapted for television, the Daily Telegraph questioned the artistic value of a musical about, quote, "so sad and peculiar a person." Later adaptations included a 1970s radio documentary called A Proper Little Gent, a 1994 BBC television episode in the Matter of Fact series, Ken Russell's short film The Lion's Mouth in 2001, and John Walsh's 2007 fictionalized account Sunday on the Crossbones, which portrays Davidson as, quote, "a well-meaning but ineffectual, bewildered by the world's wickedness and his own barely acknowledged desires." The question of David's treatment by the consistory court was raised almost immediately after the trial. Church Times argued that while his behavior had been foolish and eccentric, it had been driven by idealism. Chancellor North was criticized for a lack of compassion and for the general mismanagement of proceedings. Quote, "No experienced criminal solicitor could conceivably have blundered so badly and so consistently." In 2006, Davidson's granddaughter, Carolyn Collier, privately published a brief biography, The Rector of Stiffkey, His Life and Trial, strongly repudiating the charges against him. Historian Jonathan Tucker suggests that while Davidson may have deserved quiet censure for his shortcomings as a priest, he was not immoral. Tucker also highlights the failure of Davidson's legal team, particularly their failure to challenge the authenticity of Barbara Harris's letter, and argues that the flawed proceedings and flimsy evidence justify a re-examination by the Church of England. Davidson's life has been summarized by A.N. Wilson as that of a tragic buffoon cum Christian martyr. A.J.P. Taylor described him as a symbol of the era, Davidson often a parable of the age. He attracted much more attention than, say, Cosmo Gordon Lang, the Archbishop of Canterbury. Which man deserves a greater place in the history books? Harold Davidson's story is a collision of piety, obsession, and spectacle. A man at once earnest, foolish, and terrifyingly fearless. From the quiet rectory at Stiffkey to the chaotic circuses of Blackpool and finally to the deadly theatrics of a lion's cage in Skegness, he lived a life that blurred the line between devotion and delusion, between charity and chaos. He was a man who sought to save others as he repeatedly endangered himself, whose compassion for lost girls became the headline fodder, and whose eccentricity turned into tragedy. And yet, through the blood, through the lawsuits and the public scorn, there is something almost heroic in his stubborn refusal to ever play it by the rules. In the end, the little rector who wrestled lions, legal authorities, and his own demons may have fallen to the jaws of fate, but he did so on his own terms, and the world, in all of its absurdity, could only watch. And we are back. Are you guys ready for our brand new segment? Hit it! Who
am I? I was pissed.
Who am I? It's the new segment where I challenge you to guess, who am I? I'm an animal, okay? I'm going to give you 10 hints going from brutal difficulty to Jesus Christ. If you don't get this, you're dumb. All right? You have to guess what the animal is. I'm getting quite specific here with the animals. Don't just say, oh, it's a deer. You got to say, oh, it's the white-tailed deer, or blah, 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 okay? So, the quicker you guess it, the better you do. Let me know in the comments, wherever you're listening to this, how you go, which hint gave it away to you. So, hint number 1, or hint number 10, I should say. I am one of only 2 living members of my ancient family. Hint 9. Should I just go for... No, I'm going to go 1 to 10. Let's do that. Okay, hint number 2. My closest wild relatives live thousands of kilometers away. Okay. Hint number 3. I am native to a single country and found nowhere else in the wild. Hint number 4. I prefer freshwater environments over saltwater habitats. Okay. Might be getting a bit close now. Hint number 5. I am critically endangered with only a small wild population remaining. Hint number 6. My species once shared its habitat with early human civilizations. Okay. What are we up to? 7, I think? I can't remember. Who cares? Next hint. I am smaller and less aggressive than my more famous cousin. Okay, that hint for me is probably where I'd start to get this. Number 8. I have a powerful bite and armor-like skin. Number 9. I am a reptile that lurks in rivers and wetlands. Okay, have you got it yet? If you haven't got it yet, I think this next one's probably going to tip it over for you. Number 10. I am an alligator found in China. Did you guess it? The answer, of course, was the Chinese alligator.
Who am I? I was pissed.
Well done if you got that. If you didn't get it, I don't have to tell you. That one was pretty difficult today. I'll be honest. That one was tricky. I love the Chinese alligator. They're like smaller than the American alligator, but they make up for it because their bellies are all armored as well, which the American alligator is not. They've got quite squishy bellies. Okay, time for one of my favorite segments of the show. It's the Scratch of the Day, segment of the show where we look at news articles and we talk about them and we learn a little bit of our world together. First, we're going to do a couple of updates on a few stories, starting off with the dingo attack on Gari. I covered this last week, and there was an update which I covered in some videos which you can find on TikTok or on Instagram or on YouTube. So essentially, the story thus far, a 19-year-old backpacker named Piper James was found dead on a beach in Gari. Gari, if you don't know, is an island in Queensland, Australia, formerly known as Fraser Island, but it is now known by its traditional indigenous name as Gari, much to the chagrin of weird conservatives everywhere. This girl was found dead and surrounded by a pack of dingoes. Initially, I think we said it was 6 dingoes, but it was actually closer to about 10 dingoes surrounding her. She did have bite marks on her. The question at that point of the story was that we didn't know conclusively whether she had drowned or she was attacked by dingoes. It wasn't clear. The autopsy results sort of came back, and it was made clear that Piper James did have water in her lungs when she died, which is kind of like a telltale symptom or sign that she drowned. Water in the lungs basically means that you drowned. That's how you died. However, she was also covered in bite marks from the dingoes that were present before and after she died. I don't really know how they can tell that, but these people are pretty good at their job, so I'm going to trust them. So she did have bite marks before she drowned. Now, one theory is that these dingoes attacked her and sort of hunted her into the water, and they prevented her from coming out of the water, basically, which caused her to drown from exhaustion, which is a really harrowing idea. The idea that, like, I know I'm getting so tired treading water, I just want to go inland on the beach, but I can't because if I do, these dogs are going to attack me. Absolutely wild, awful way to go. And then, of course, there were bite marks and scratches and stuff like that afterwards. I don't know. They didn't, and I think it's good that they don't tell us this because it's a bit much, but there was no indication on how much she was consumed after she was drowned by the dingoes. We don't know that. Now, the next part of the story is the part that kind of causes a fair amount of debate. At the last episode, I did say, look, they're probably going to cull some of these animals. They're probably going to try to find the ones that were responsible for the bite marks and kill them, destroy the animals, which is typical of what you do to sort of any animal that acquires, a taste for human meat. It's pretty normal to hunt them down. For tigers and bears and stuff like that, it makes sense. You don't want them to start looking at humans as a food source. And I think it's probably the same for the dingoes there. However, the follow-up to the story is that the government did, in fact, authorize a cull of the dingoes, and they killed 6 of the dingoes, and they are looking at potentially culling a few more. This has created a bit of backlash amongst a lot of people, particularly the indigenous groups, the traditional custodians of the land, the Aboriginal group that I guess doesn't own the island but lives there, say that they were not consulted on this decision at all, and they've basically lambasted the decision and said it was awful and shouldn't have happened. They view the dingo as a sacred animal, but also scientifically, the dingo is crucial part of the ecology, and the food chain on the island. So it's also caused a lot of debate amongst people about culls. Like last episode, we talked about the shark cull and if that was justified or a good idea. Who's to say? A lot of people say that it doesn't do anything. My personal belief is that, we jump to culling animals as a way to try to, project a little element of strength out into the world that we are in control when we're really not. And I think that potentially it's the same here. However, I will say, look, as much as I am, against pretty much any culling of animals, with very few what am I trying to say? With very few exceptions is the word I'm trying to say. When an animal does get a taste for humans and start to look at humans as a food source, that will lead to more deaths. Now, you could make the argument, let's just stop letting people travel to this beach. It doesn't have to be a tourist destination. It's a national park. It's like a wildlife zone. Why do we need to have people there traveling and hanging out and surfing anyway? If you didn't have people there, then people couldn't get attacked. That's sort of one of the arguments. Other people say that no, dingoes need to, learn that they should be scared of humans. Some people are saying this is a really good example of why gun control in Australia needs to be loosened, which I disagree with. But their argument is that if she had a gun, she could have killed the dingoes. To which I say, hey, dude, she was a 19-year-old Canadian backpacker who was going for a swim. She didn't have her AR-15 on her. Sorry. I don't think that would have helped at all. There was no one else around her that could have helped, even if they had a gun. So, no, I don't think that's... And also, some guns are legal. She could have had a gun. I mean, she probably couldn't because she's Canadian. But if you need a gun... You can get a gun in Australia. Like, it's not like impossible to do. If I wanted a gun, I could get one. It's just a little bit more of a process than if you were in like America or something like that. So that's the update on that story. Very sad. The other update is for one of the shark attack victims from the previous week. So there were 3 to 4 attacks within the spate of 24 hours last week, which is very uncommon and very strange. The first one was a 12-year-old boy who this is a little mistake I made. I think I said he was surfing. He wasn't surfing when he was attacked. He and his friends were jumping into the water from rocks, which is a great time. So that young boy was 12 years old, was bitten on both legs and taken to hospital in a critical condition. And I think I did mention that it wasn't looking good. And unfortunately, in the last few days, I can't remember the day exactly, but it was announced that little boy had indeed passed away, which makes that probably the first fatal shark attack in Australia this year, probably for quite a while. I'd have to go back to the Shark Bites files to see, what's happened there. But yeah, a very sad conclusion to that part of the story, that this young boy did die. He apparently had lost brain function, was clinically brain dead a few days before he actually was killed, and not killed, before he died. His family was, quote, preparing for the worst, but very unfortunately the worst outcome has happened, and he did pass away. I don't have an update on the 20-year-old surfer who was bitten, because he was also rushed in critical condition, but because I don't have an update, I believe that means he's probably recovering. I probably would have heard about it if he actually had died. So those are our sort of 2 big updates today. And we are going to, of course, go to some news stories as well. We can't just keep covering the same stories over and over again. We do have to move on. This is a crazy story from China. A snow leopard has mauled a skier in China. There's video of this, although it's being blocked by YouTube because of how bloody it is, but I did see it. It's wild. So this is from CNN. We're going to read the article and I'll tell you my thoughts. And if I can watch the video, I'll watch it. And on YouTube, I'll put the video like there or something like that. Okay, so this is from CNN. A tourist was mauled by a rare snow leopard in northwest China on Friday after trying to get close for a photo, according to authorities and state media. The tourist, a skier, was bitten in Kortokai town in China's Xinjiang region while on their way back to their hotel, according to the country's Forestry and Grassland Bureau. They had spotted the snow leopard, one of the world's most elusive creatures to see in the wild. They'd gotten out of their vehicle and approached it to take photos before they were attacked, according to state-owned broadcaster CCTV. Video footage that circulated on social media shows the tourist lying motionless on the snowy ground with a leopard sitting nearby. In another clip, 2 bystanders helped the injured tourist to their feet and towards safety as they clutched their face to their as they clutched their face below a ski helmet. A voice can be heard asking whether the leopard had left, and one of the bystanders replied, "It's gone." Further clips show the leopard moving through the deep snow in an outdoor area with trees and boulders in the background. The tourist was taken to the hospital and is in stable condition, the Forestry Bureau said. It added that the local authorities have stepped up their safety patrols and public awareness campaigns. The general public and tourists are urged to strictly abide by the safety guidelines, maintain a safe distance when encountering wild animals, and report to the police immediately to ensure personal safety, it said in an online notice. Snow leopards, native to Central and South Asia, are a protected species within China and a symbol of the country's mountainous and high-altitude ecosystems. There are only between 4,000 and 6,500 of them left worldwide, with 60% of their habitat located in China, according to the WWF. With a thick white-grey coat that blends into their surroundings, these reclusive felines live on high, rocky mountains with some of the harshest conditions on Earth, according to the WWF. Very few snow leopards have been known to attack humans, according to various wildlife organizations and wildlife experts and Chinese state media reports. One study in 2020 surveyed 261 herders in Mongolia, another common habitat for snow leopards. While many reported having seen snow leopards or had their livestock attacked by snow leopards, none reported any attacks on humans. So the video isn't currently here, but I'm going to see if I can find it, because it is like a pretty wild thing to see. So I'll try to, this looks good. I'm going to try to play it, and I'll put it on. Yeah, wow. It's a lot of blood. Kitty cat. Oh. There you go. Pretty wild. Yeah. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can watch that video, or you can just look it up yourself. So yeah, pretty crazy story. My wife showed me that video. I was like, oh my God, I've never heard of a snow leopard attacking people. They're so reclusive. That's one of the rarer big cat attacks, I would say. Probably has to be the rarest. I don't think cheetahs attack people very often. That would also be pretty rare. Okay, final story today. This is from a couple weeks ago. I did see these videos on TikTok. We didn't get to talk about it last week because of how much animal attack news there was in Australia. So we're going to talk about it now. A rampaging elephant kills at least 20 people, including children, in India, officials say. Indian wildlife officers are hunting a rampaging wild elephant blamed for killing at least 20 people and injuring 15 others in the forests of Shakardland villages, and officials said on Tuesday. The elephant, a lone bull, is reported to have gone on a rampage for 9 days, beginning in early January, creating a panic in the rural West Singhbhum district. We are trying to trace and rescue this violent wild elephant that killed so many people, government forest officer Aditya Naranya told AFP, confirming the toll of 20 dead. Children and the elderly are among the dead, as well as a professional elephant handler known as a mahout. But after wreaking a trail of destruction, it had not been spotted since Friday, despite multiple patrols in the area. Officials said search teams, aided by drones, are combing dense forest tracts, including National Reserve neighbouring Odisha state. Fear has driven residents of more than 20 villages to abandon their farms or barricade themselves indoors at night, elected village head Pratrap Chachar told AFP. A police team or forest official website visits in the night provide essential help to... let me say that again. Sorry, I got that wrong. A police team or forest official vehicle, I don't know why I said website, visits the night to provide essential help to villagers. Hundreds of thousands of Indians are affected each year by crop-raiding elephants. Asian elephants are now restricted to just 15% of their original habitat. The usually shy animals are coming into increasing contact with humans because of rapidly expanding settlements and growing forest disturbance, including mining operations. As elephant habitats shrink, conflict between humans and wild elephants has grown. 629 people were killed by elephants across India in 2023 to 2024, according to parliamentary figures. The elephants that pose the most danger to humans are often rogue bulls, solitary male animals enraged during musk, which is a period of heightened sexual activity where testosterone levels soar. A former forest official said that the elephant was likely in musk and may now have calmed down and rejoined its herd. India is home to the vast majority of the world's remaining wild Asian elephants, a species listed as endangered by the IUCN and increasingly threatened by shrinking habitat. The Wildlife Institute of India last year issued a new estimate that put the country's wild elephant population at 22,446, a report that also warned of the deepening pressures on one of India's most iconic animals. Last month, 7 elephants were killed and a calf was injured when a high-speed passenger train collided with a herd crossing the tracks in India's northeastern state of Assam. Good Lord. The country recently opened an elephant hospital in Mathura. The southern state of Tamil Nadu has also launched an artificial intelligence and machine learning-enabled surveillance system meant to prevent elephant deaths on railways. There have been deadly elephant attacks in other parts of the world in recent months. Last July, 2 women from the UK and New Zealand were killed by an elephant while walking on a safari in Zambia. In April of 2025, officials in Kenya said a 54-year-old man was killed by an elephant in the central part of the country. In January last year, a tourist was killed by an elephant in South Africa's famous Kruger Park. That same month, police in Thailand said a panic-stricken elephant killed a Spanish tourist while she was bathing the animal at the sanctuary. The month before that, an elephant killed a 49-year-old woman at a national park in Lae province in northern Thailand. In July 2024, a Spanish tourist was trampled to death by elephants after he left his fiancée in the car to take photos at a different game reserve in South Africa. So those are the two stories we're going to cover today, gang. We've gone a little bit over time, I think. Thank you so much for listening. I think that's going to be the end of our episode there. I want to say a big thank you to everyone on Patreon who is supporting the show. These episodes come out like 4 or 5 days, maybe like close to 3 or 4 days earlier. So if you would like to get your daily dose of man-eaters even earlier, an audio version and the video version are both going to be available over on Patreon as soon as I finish editing them, essentially. The new sort of plan to release is that they come out on Wednesday mornings in California, and a little bit earlier than that in New York, and then Australia, which is Tuesday night. So that's the plan. Thank you to everyone who's supporting me over on Patreon. I'm trying to put my heart and soul into this show now. So any suggestions, any feedback is genuinely, appreciated. Please make it nice and respectful, though. Please be nice. Don't just tell me it sucks. Don't just tell me my accents are shit. They are. I'm well aware they're bad. Last week's Swedish Norwegian accent was like an affront to God. It was awful. But you can say it in a nicer way, man. I'm just kidding. One person commented on Spotify. I was like, good Lord, I love the podcast, but that accent was awful. And you know what? I can't do anything but agree with that. It was really, really bad. The other accents weren't too bad. Anyway, why am I talking about accents? Follow me on all the, the social media bullshit. Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. Go do all that. The email is in the caption below as well if you want to send any suggestions for stories you'd like covered, any news stories you want to do in Scratch the Day. If you'd like to suggest an animal for Who Am I, we can also do that as well. That's going to be it for another week, my friends. I love you very, very much. And please, for the love of all that's holy, stay safe out there because as we've learned, it's a goddamn jungle out there. Hooroo.